Well, the spring game happened. It sure did. I was there to watch it. Some of you were there. Not many of you were there, but some of you were there to watch it as well. Pitt's Blue Gold game was held at Acrisure Stadium on Saturday. The blue team won 17-14. So once again, you should not take betting advice from me, since I set the line at Gold minus 8.5, I think is what I decided, since, they had the first team quarterback and the first team offensive line and the offensive coordinator and all of that, and, some pretty good players on defense. It seemed like a reasonable expectation that Gold would kind of run away with it. Instead, Gold went 3 and out a bunch of times, missed some field goals, and, the blue team was able to get some touchdowns. Gold also turned the ball over, which is a bit of a mistake. But, spring games are spring games. You try not to take, you can really sort of choose what you want to take out of a spring game, right? You want to feel encouraged about something, you can probably find some guys who played well. If the guys that you're hoping will play well in the season don't play well in the spring game, guess what? You can just say, well, it's just a spring game. It doesn't matter. And then, so you could take all the positives and say that those things matter, and you can count on those going forward, and you can ignore all the negatives and say, well, it doesn't really matter. It was only a spring game, played with the, watered down playbook, and, personnel groupings all mixed up, and, the end of spring and season doesn't start for another 5 months and all those guys. It's very easy to sort of choose your own adventure on this. Whatever you want the spring game to be, that's what it was for you. And so I say all of that before we launch into our observations from the spring game, our observations from spring camp, and kind of what we learned about Pitt and where things stand coming out of 14 practices plus a spring game, where things stand with Pitt football as they head into sort of the second offseason, right? And I know it's the second portal window. I have no idea what they're going to do there. This is going to be an interesting week, and, next couple of weeks as we see guys who go into the transfer portal. We see if Pitt pursues some guys in the transfer portal. We should make a quick mention that the Pitt basketball team did get a transfer commitment over the weekend in Barry Dunning Jr., a wing from South Alabama. We'll talk more about basketball and transfers tomorrow on the Morning Pit, just in case there's any more news that comes out. I went back and forth on what we should talk about today. Should we talk about the Blue Gold game and wrap up spring camp, or should we talk about Pitt basketball getting a transfer commitment? I decided we'll go with the Blue Gold game today, and we'll talk hoops transfers tomorrow, and then we'll see what comes the rest of the week. Like I said, I think I said it on the Friday edition of the Morning Pit on the mailbag, that I'm actually going to go out of town. We're going to take a little family trip here starting tomorrow. We're going Tuesday to Tuesday. A little unconventional, but that's when the flights are cheapest. So we're going to go Tuesday to Tuesday. Well, plenty of content, of course, at Panther-Lair.com. I've already got some articles written and some things planned ahead. Jim will be there, and all of our strong basketball team. Those guys will be pumping out content as well. It's not like we won't have any content. The Morning Pit, though, I'm thinking about recording a few things ahead of time. It's tricky. Last summer, went on family vacation. I had like a bunch of stuff recorded ahead of time because it was like July. There wasn't really a chance of like news breaking and rendering something I was talking about, irrelevant or moot. This is a little bit trickier. If I spend all of Thursday's Morning Pit talking about this player or that player, well, what if that guy goes into the transfer portal? Most guys won't. I don't think they're going to lose many guys to they'll lose some to the spring transfer portal window, and they'll probably try to add one or two out of the spring transfer portal window. But it is tough because there will be news that comes up, and it might either, make whatever Morning Pit I pre-record feel, it might make it feel dated or irrelevant, or it might make it factually inaccurate altogether if we talk about players who end up going into the portal. So it's a little bit trickier to pre-record stuff, but I have a few things I do want to talk about, a few ideas of things that we can talk about this week. So I'm going to try and get a bunch of those locked in so we have some Morning Pit content for you through the week. But obviously no live show on Wednesday night. Probably won't have a mailbag on Friday, and we might be a little bit, there might not be a Morning Pit every day, but we'll try and get one to you, at least a few over the course of the next week. But either way, we've got stuff to talk about today. We've got the Blue Gold game to recap, what I thought about it, and you can obviously leave your comments and questions here on YouTube or on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. Let's get into a little Blue Gold recap right here on the Monday edition of the Morning Pit. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's Monday. It's the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you won't miss any of our Pitt video content. Like I said, I don't really have a content schedule for this week on when we'll have Morning Pits. I think we'll have a few more. We're obviously going to have one today and tomorrow. But I think we'll have a few more kind of throughout the week, but I don't have a specific schedule already laid out, lined up, however you want to call it. And so one good way to make sure you don't miss it is subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com and turn on the notifications. And then you'll get an alert sent to your phone whenever we post new videos. Also when we go live, but we're not going live this week. So that's a good way to make sure you don't miss any of our Morning Pit episodes this week. Subscribe, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and turn on those notifications, and you'll be clued into everything that we do. And then, of course, check out the website, Panther-Lair.com, the Pitt sports site on the 247 Sports Network, covering Pitt football, basketball, and recruiting. The most comprehensive source of all that stuff that you're going to find. Plus, we have the message boards to interact with other Pitt fans all day, every day. Panther-Lair.com. All right, so what stood out on Saturday? Well, it was a 17-14 game, so you got 4 offensive touchdowns, which, to be quite honest, is a bit of an outburst. For the Pat Narduzzi era. I mean, we'll never forget. I forget what year it was, 17 or 15 or 16. I don't know. One of those first 3 or 4 years, Dane Jackson had a pick 6, and that was the only touchdown scored in the Blue Gold game. We've seen some pretty miserable, low-scoring efforts over the years. Nothing to be all excited about. And I mean, we should say right off the bat, I couldn't tell you what happened in the spring game in 2021, and I couldn't tell you what happened in the spring game in 2023. What I'm fairly confident about is there probably wasn't much in either of those years that gave you a really strong sense of what was to come in the fall. I don't know if you necessarily, I'm pretty sure you didn't walk out of, was it Heinz Field at that point in 2021? I'm pretty sure you didn't walk out of the stadium after the spring game 2021 and said, I think I just watched an ACC championship team that's going to go 11-3. And I suspect that, there probably were more people who said this than people who said I just watched an 11-3 team. There might have been a few people who, after the 2023 spring game, walked out and said, I just watched a 3-9 team. But chances are, you probably... there have been very few times where the spring game really correlates with what the season would ultimately become. I'm not sure what happened in last year's spring game, but for the last year's spring game to correlate with what the season would ultimately become, I guess you would have to have a perfect first half and then a complete disaster of a second half. Is that how that would correlate? or would it have to be whenever Eli Holstein was out there, it was pretty good, and when Nate Yarnell was out there, it wasn't? Is that how it would correlate? So we have to say that right off the bat, that everything we're going to talk about here, all the conclusions we are all inevitably going to draw over the course of spring, or over the course of this offseason based on what we saw in the spring game, we have to take it all with a grain of salt. Now, that doesn't mean that all of the spring camp observations should be taken with a grain of salt. There were plenty of things we saw throughout the course of spring camp and plenty of things we heard throughout the course of spring camp that all are probably pretty relevant to keep in mind, particularly at key positions. Some of the big questions that we were asking coming into spring camp, I think we got something approaching answers to a number of them. Offensive line, defensive end in particular, probably the biggest question marks. Wide receiver was another big question mark. And I think we got some answers, not necessarily good answers, but we got some answers to a lot of those questions. But perhaps the most notable development of spring camp. I shouldn't say the most notable development. There were a lot of notable developments, but maybe one of the more surprising questions to come out of spring camp. And I'm probably messing this up because this could be a whole Morning Pit episode on its own, and it very well may be. I might just expound on this later in the week. But one of the more surprising questions that emerged in spring camp, we knew going into spring camp there would be a question about the offensive line. And we knew there would be questions about the defensive ends. And there would be questions about the wide receivers. I think those are probably 3 positions I was most curious about and unsure about and had questions about. And I think most people probably would agree. We can go through all the spots and say, well, we felt good about this or felt bad about that. But those were probably the 3 positions, in particular the offensive line and the defensive ends, where there were the most questions. What I didn't expect and what I didn't anticipate was coming out of spring camp with maybe a question or two about the quarterback position. Now, I know we've got a few viewers, regular viewers of the Morning Pitt, who will probably be in the comments here very quickly saying that I should have seen it coming all along. I should have known there would be questions, and that if the coaching staff gives these guys a fair chance, there would be real questions about who should be the starting quarterback. I'm not ready to go quite so far as to say, I don't know, to say it's a legitimate question of who should be the starting quarterback, but I'm also not that far away from it. I think there were some very interesting developments this spring, mostly driven by the performances of Mason Heinchel and Julian Duggar. I think those two guys probably performed beyond what was expected and above what was expected this spring. And at the same time, Eli Holstein, who is maybe still recovering a bit from his apparently off-season ankle surgery, maybe didn't quite live up to expectations. Expectations that had been set based on how he played in the first really 5 games last season. Holstein played well last year in the first 5 games. Inconsistent, but overall well. He finished the season, obviously injured, but the clear QB1. Entered spring camp as the clear QB1. And he likely ended spring camp. He did end spring camp as the clear QB1. He will enter training camp as the clear QB1. But the thing is, it doesn't seem like Holstein had a great camp by all accounts, by what we've seen, what we've been told, officially, what we've heard off the record. It doesn't seem like maybe he had the kind of camp that you were hoping for. Now, again, you can account for some of that due to the injury and continued recovery from the injury. But then at the same time, it sounds like Julian Duggar and Mason Heinchel were pretty good this spring. Duggar probably didn't throw it as well as he would have liked in the spring game, but he definitely showed that he can run. Some of the times they blew whistles on him. I mean, he would have kept going. He would have made plays, and I think his arm is good. I don't think his throws on Saturday are necessarily, and his passing on Saturday were necessarily indicative of how good he is and how good he's been throughout spring camp. And Mason Heinchel, had a pretty good stat line, threw pretty well, and overall looked good. And he was one of the guys who got the most sort of hype, somewhat publicly and somewhat just sort of in private conversations. There was a lot of hype about him. I think both of those guys. I don't know what Cade Bell's expectations were coming into spring camp. I don't know what Pat Narduzzi's expectations were coming into spring camp. But I have to think that those two guys outperformed the expectations. I mean, Duggar, you really had very limited game experience, game film to base your expectations on. I think there was enough game film to ask the question of why he wasn't higher on the depth chart, but that's another discussion for another day. Heinchel coming in had no game film, right? He's a true freshman who enrolled in January. So the expectations were probably set at a certain level, but not anything too high or too crazy. But I have to think both of those guys exceeded expectations. Meanwhile, Eli Holstein maybe didn't have the camp that he was hoping to have or was expected to have. And so it sets up a very interesting situation. Again, I think Eli Holstein is the QB1 right now. I think he goes into training camp as the QB1, with Julian Duggar behind him and Mason Heinchel behind him. And I think that's how they enter camp. Just like last year, Nate Yarnell entered training camp as the QB1 with Eli Holstein behind him. And we saw how that ended up. Now, I'm not going to sit here and predict that a different quarterback wins the starting job over Eli Holstein, that Duggar or Heinchel are starting against Duquesne. I'm just going to say that I think things got more interesting this spring and should set up for a pretty interesting summer and a pretty interesting August. We'll talk a lot about this throughout the offseason, I think. Other things on offense. I mean, Ja'Karian Turner showed some of the burst that he has, shown throughout spring camp with Desmond Reed getting hurt and Joels Goff missing time. The door was really open for Turner, who pops up on screen conveniently just as I'm saying this, and Justin Cook, who transferred from I keep getting this wrong. I keep saying Stroudsburg. Is it, where is he here? Justin Cook, East Stroudsburg. Transferred from East Stroudsburg. Kid originally from Harrisburg, went to East Stroudsburg, came here as a wide receiver, moved to running back. With Goff and Reed missing time, Turner and Cook really kind of took advantage of it and carried the ball a lot, got a lot of playing time, got a lot of work, and got a lot of work on Saturday in the Blue Gold game. And they got all the work on Saturday in the Blue Gold game, and they think it looked pretty good. I think Turner in particular looks really promising. Cook is an interesting guy. I wonder how he'll fit in on the depth chart once two more freshmen come in, and if they get a transfer running back or something like that. I mean, Cook looked pretty intriguing, but as a walk-on transfer from East Stroudsburg, I think he might fall down the depth chart behind some of those other guys as they arrive. So, interesting situation with the running back room. Wide receivers, I don't think showed a whole lot. Kateris Hicks, the transfer from Louisville, obviously had the 65-yard touchdown. That was impressive. Cam Sapp had a nice touchdown catch. I don't know if they showed a ton. Deuce Spann was unavailable due to injury. Raphael Williams and Sincerely didn't practice at all this spring. Kenny Johnson, was just okay in the spring game, but I still have really high expectations for him this season. I think he's going to be really good. He's going to be the wide receiver one, and I think he'll play up to that level once the season starts. The spring game, unlike last year where they fed him the ball 70 times or something in the spring game, I don't think it's, that didn't necessarily translate into volume for him in the season. I think it'll be the flip this time where, didn't really do much in the spring game, but I think he'll have a big season. Tight ends, there wasn't a lot to see. Malachi Thomas got targeted 20 times. Had a number of unfortunate drops. I think he's going to be a part of the passing game and a part of the offense this year, so he's going to have to take some big steps. He's going to have to be much better in the season than he was in the Blue Gold game, I think. And then the offensive line, there was pressure. It's funny, the offensive line was really one of the, in the trenches, I should say. The offensive line and defensive line were really one of the only, areas that there was actual real contact, because this scrimmage was played thud, where guys weren't tackling to the ground. It was effectively, two-hand touch, glorified two-hand touch. But there was real contact up front. I thought the offensive line was okay. I thought they gave up a decent amount of pressure, probably more than you would like to see. The defense kind of blitzed, maybe a little bit more than I expected. It seemed like they were bringing pressure a lot. Maybe it was just on third down. That group will be interesting to see how they come together. Ryan Barrett, right tackle, should be fine. Lyndon Cooper at center should be fine. I think B.J. Williams is a good right guard. That left side will be interesting to see how it shakes out. Kendall Stanley and Jeff Percy competing for the left tackle job. Keith Gouvier working at left guard. I think I'm pronouncing that wrong again. I'm going to have to re-listen to our tape of when we asked how to pronounce that. Gouveia, I think it might have been. And there was an interesting situation with him where he had to end up being the second team, or he had to end up being the center for, I forget what, the blue team, I think, after being the starting left guard all through camp. He had to work as the center, effectively the second team center, because Ryan Coretta, who had been the backup center, got hurt late in camp, I think during the last scrimmage. And so they sent Gouveia over there. And then that ended up having Kendall Stanley, who had been competing for left tackle, playing at left guard. So even though they tried not to have the offensive lines all mixed up in the spring game, they still ended up with the offensive lines somewhat mixed up in the spring game. I do think they're better across the starting five this year than they were last year. I think the depth is better than it was last year. And, whether they try to go get another lineman in the spring portal, I don't think it's a great idea. You got to find the right guy for the right price. And that's the case all the time. But I think it's even more difficult to do in the spring portal window, where you'll end up, you could very well end up paying more for a lesser player that you could have got, you could have gotten a better player for cheaper in, quality wise in the winter window. But it's such a seller's market in the spring portal window. Teams are desperate. If you need an offensive tackle right now, you're in a desperate situation. And so those guys are going to command a higher dollar because There are going to be schools that are willing to pay it, teams and collectives and whatever it may be that are willing to pay it. So I could see them kicking the tires, maybe on another interior lineman. My guess, and I mean, this could be completely wrong. By the time you watch this video, they could have gone completely against this. But my guess is they won't get any impact linemen out of this spring portal window. And the guys that the guys that we are talking about, Bear, Williams, Cooper, Gouveia, Stanley, Percy. I mean, these will be the guys that will ultimately make up, the starting five will come from that group. And then the depth will fill in behind them. Wow, we're already past the 20-minute mark, and we've only talked about offense. Guess what? That means we get another Morning Pitt later in the week. These next couple of days are just going to be about me, seeing how many of these things I can record before we leave tomorrow. And the fact that we only got through the offense and we're already past the 20-minute mark, well, that means that we're going to have another Morning Pitt Blue Gold game recap just focusing on the defense. So where this was only going to be one episode, it's now two. And where there were only going to be 2 or 3 episodes this week, now there's going to be 3 or 4. So look at that. We'll get another Blue Gold recap. We'll do that tomorrow. We'll talk about the defense tomorrow, what we saw out of Pitt's defense, and kind of what we learned overall about the defense this spring. Interesting group. Maybe some areas they still need to address. Maybe some things they might be looking for in the portal, and just overall how that group looks and how they've come together heading into the 2025 season. So that's our Blue Gold game offensive recap. Guess I'm going to have to put that headline on this. So this is just an offensive recap, and tomorrow we'll have our defensive recap, and then we'll get into some transfer portal basketball talk. Maybe we'll do the transfer portal basketball talk tomorrow and the Blue Gold game defensive recap on Wednesday. We'll figure it out. We'll have a plan. One way or the other, we'll have a plan. All right. Thanks so much for watching today. Appreciate it. Like this video and subscribe. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Check out the website, Panther-Lair.com. And we will catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pitt right here on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com.